Good afternoon, everybody. Mike Winkler here, and I wanted to take a minute and I wanted to talk about some of the concepts that have been bedeviling us recently, and there's been some competitive noise and made and all of that, and I wanted to talk about behind the music kind of security intelligence, and specifically what rules mean, what machine learning means, what cognitive means, artificial intelligence, all of this good stuff. There's a lot of hay being made right now on how security intelligence is done. So I decided to take a minute and go through and look at the rules and look at the way that this actually works. Okay, so first thing was remove the marketing terms, because if you ask 3 people, you get 5 opinions, right? So I asked the question, what are we trying to accomplish here? What are we actually trying to get done? And, out of your security intelligence, what you're looking for out of the system is really for it to alert you when something's going on, right? You get right down to it. What you really want is the system to let you know when there's a problem. And taking that as kind of a problem statement, I broke this down and took a look at it. So, okay. We start at the beginning. There are static rules, and static rules are good. You can look at these in kind of a basic way and say, oh, Mike had 3 failed logins in an hour, generated an offense. And although this is an example of a static rule, it's also a tiny corner of it. Okay, so conditions that mean something when seen together, right? It might be 3 instances of the same thing, but most of the time it's multiple instances. So you can't just, look at your firewall and see 3 instances on it. We have to pull from a couple of sources, right? This is the real baseline stuff. So in this case, I have a user named Mary Shelley, and she is logged in at 8:22 a.m., sounds fine, at an IP address. And then Mary's logged in at 8:29 a.m. at a different IP address, and on the surface, this looks fine. Doesn't look like a problem at all, until you realize one of those IP addresses is in Brazil and another one is in France, and I get some real questions about what's going on with Mary. This might be a problem. It might be a VPN, it might be a script running, it might be that Mary's been credentials sharing and we have to slap her on the wrist, right? So this is something that raises a question, and is an example of a static rule of, in this case, it's a geo-velocity rule of someone shouldn't be logged in inside 7 minutes in, 2 countries. Or, maybe someone shouldn't be logged in the countries we don't expect them in. This is a basic example of a static rule. But then if we look at what's going on with Mary, right? And this is what an offense is doing in QRadar. I see these things going on at 8:20 some in the morning. I can say at 8:31, 2 minutes after that the France login, Mary had a huge fusillade of failed logins to a domain controller. And I'm like, that's not right. And then Mary has an SSL connection to a known malware site. And oh, by the way, Mary Shelley is root admin on your Unix boxes. This is a problem, right? So what we can do with a static rule is we keep collecting disparate events, and we set an importance on them by how many there are or what those things are. So in a static rule, we can go through and say, well, okay, connection to a known malware site, this is a problem, but not a giant one. But for my root admin who, oh, by the way, is showing signs of compromise, we raise the severity, right? So this is a static rule at scale, right? This is a small example of it. And there's hundreds of rules inside QRadar, and you can write your own. And I know other products have their own rules. And sometimes we'll see lots of conditions, right? This is a more complex example of an offense in QRadar, right? Oh my God, not only is my user Mary Shelley showing as compromised, that her IP address at .200 there in Brazil is creating EC2 incidences, and then a port scan, and then, oh, by the way, from the other IP address where she was in France, PowerShell's been launched, and oh, by the way, there's excessive firewall denies. Mary is either turned evil or has got the worst virus in history, right? But this is all going to be one offense, right? And what we do, and this is, once again, this is kind of Sim 101. What we do with static rules is this all becomes an offense. You need to look at one thing to find out and say, hey, what the heck is going on with Mary here, right? QRadar does this out of the box. No rule construction is required. As I've said 30 times, and those of you who listen to a lot of my videos could probably recite this at this point, there is roughly a 3-week burn-in period to QRadar where you have to teach it what your environment is like, who your domain controllers are, all of that good stuff. So there is no rules construction to this. all these crazy things happening to Mary, being gathered, thrown in one offense, and being presented to you. This is out of the box. Now, this is static rules, right? But they're still good. They're still useful. And it is still the baseline in the way everybody does their work, QRadar and a lot of our major competitors. Okay, so going past that, we have conditions evolve. And I want to talk a bit about machine learning. And machine learning is complicated. And I in no way am trying to talk about all of machine learning in the world. And it's one of those words with a very, very squishy variable meaning depending on what you're trying to accomplish. So if we take a look at what machine learning means, and in this case I'm creating peer groups, is the machine can make its next steps smarter, right? So I've got 3 users at this point. And Mary Shelley, Kathy Shelley, and Peter Shelley. And they're all logged in roughly at the same time, and you see a pattern of when they come and go. Okay, great. So, and I can see in this pattern is these people all, oddly enough, have the same last name. Maybe it's a husband and wife and her sister, we don't know, right? But they all have a common IP range, and they all start work at roughly the same time frame. Mary tends to run a little earlier, Peter runs a little later, but you can see the pattern of activity. Okay, and we can say, okay, because now that we've created a pattern, when things start being a problem based on that pattern. If a user logs in from a place they shouldn't, or they haven't generally, that's a question. If they log in outside the normal time frame, that's a question. But, and this is one of the big base premises of machine learning, if they have a really normal couple of days a week, just start turning that down and de-escalating that so that if someone works for your company for 10 years, they don't keep showing up because they make one mistake every 6 months, right? So machine learning is essentially a rather complex set of point systems that goes through and it builds up these point counters about what's good and what's bad. And when point counters hit a certain level, in this case, it generates an offense, right? So, okay, people log in and they're doing normal things, they're doing their job, and I've started to establish point values based on their normal, based on themselves and on each other, and I set a point threshold. Okay. So now that I have those patterns of behavior, what do we get out of those? And I can say, well, in any given day, Mary has 5 points fewer than she did yesterday or than she did last week. And I'm like, okay. So Mary might have had a fat finger week, or she might have been running late because she was sick, and I don't know, right? But Mary was a little out of sorts last week, and she's 5 points lower. So she's heading back towards the median norm of behavior. Kathy is 2 points higher, but that's well within our range of tolerance, right? To say, well, okay, so Kathy is doing a few odd things, but nothing terrible. But Peter's up 18 points. So what this means is he has stepped outside his own definition of normal based on these kind of measurements, as well as his peer group's definition of normal, right? From a simple pattern, more complex patterns emerge. This is still just adding up points, right? And machine learning is just a very, very complicated, intelligent, well-built way to add up point counters. I'm sure the machine learning aficionados and people that sell the master's degree courses in this would disagree with me on that. But for the point of view of security intelligence, that is a nice working definition. Okay, so our complex patterns. I can take a look at what Peter did do, right? And these are all actual rules that live inside QRadar. And I'm like, what's going on with Peter today? Well, he had a data exfiltration by cloud service. That's a real friggin' problem. An SSH session. He's had the right to create accounts, but doesn't usually. And then logged into an unusual place. This is enough points that we need to jump out of our chair and see what's going on with my executive, Peter, right? What's happening here with him, man? So this is an example of machine learning. It sets a baseline. It understands how people act. It assigns points to normal. It subtracts points when they behave more normal. And it generates an alert, in our case an offense, when something is outside the normal enough that it feels you should be alerted. Now, this can trigger a single offense or a cascade, right? Depending on what you want. Some people want one offense to say, hey, what's going on with Peter? Some people might be in the position where they're saying, I want one because of data exfiltration so it can be investigated that way. I want a different one based on his unusual activity. Okay, so this is up to you, but it does generate these offenses. Out of the box, no rules construction required. Machine learning has been present in the back end of QRadar for at least the 5 years I've worked at IBM, and probably a lot longer. Machine learning is better and better with the things that come in underlying UBA. And this is one of these odd things is the idea that, oh, QRadar is a bunch of static baselines. Well, it has a bunch of static baselines because they're useful. But it also has this powerful tool of machine learning that spots patterns in people's and machines' behavior and alerts you when things start acting outside their norm individually, their norm as a group, or their norm in society. Okay, kind of a side thought here is I am not asking you to write rules in a Python editor or any kind of a scripting language. I don't need you to know regular expressions, none of that crazy crap. This is my rules wizard, and this is just literally a snapshot from my test box. So what you do when you write rules in QRadar, this should look like your Outlook rules wizard or something like that, that you go through and you just pop criteria out, and sometimes you're going to have to fill in, 1 hour, 3 hours, actual numbers like that. But rules are created in this tool that lives inside QRadar. This is both static baselines and machine learning. Most people don't come out here more than a little basic tuning to get their QRadar where they want it to be, but you have the ability to write however complex of a rule, static or self-learning, as you want. Okay? That is in every version of QRadar, and it has been for many years. Okay. So now I want to get into what we called cognitive security. We used to use the term AI, but now AI freaks everyone out because they either think of Skynet or Haley Joel Osment, the little boy that wanted the Brew Fairy. So we're going to leave out the term AI just because it's become so emotionally loaded, it doesn't mean anything anymore, right? So IBM has kind of settled on the term cognitive security. And in this case, we're talking about QRadar Advisor with Watson and what that does, right? And this is a different kind of thing than we've been doing with our machine learning rules or with our static baselines, because this is a service that lives on top of your QRadar, right? And it does a number of things for you. The big one, it prioritizes the effort for your analysts. So that if I've got 15 offenses that popped up today, and it knows of the QRadars in the world, and based on your experience, 3 of those are going to be tuning errors you need to get to when you get a chance. And, 2 of those are going to be like, oh, there's a virus, but you caught it. Good job, Semantic. But there's 3, 4 of them that are important, and you should get to those first. So Watson will go through, and it will tell you, hey, these are very likely to be your highest priority events. MITRE mapping, right? The MITRE framework, if you're not into it, is a breakdown of how threats work. Are they in an information gathering stage? Are they in a expanding of their footprint phase? Are they in a data exfiltration phase? Are they in a ruining your environment phase? And they're all different, right? Watson will map your offenses or offense activity to the MITRE framework to do what's called breaking the attack chain, right? So if I can tell you, based on what my Watson advisor is telling you, right, that, hey, you have the new worm of the week, or you have a bad actor from Bulgaria that's broken into your system, this is a picture of the attack chain, and we may end up doing a video on just the MITRE attack chain because it's a cool thing. This is where they are in their attack path, so you know where to break their attack path, how to keep them from succeeding. Okay, and one of the things that Watson does is it gives you that mapping to MITRE. Environment cross-check. I love this. This is what we used to call phase 3, so I find a problem in Watson, and I was doing this with a real live customer the other day. And they had a machine they had cleaned a malware off that lived in their DMZ. No big deal. And we then did a Watson check, and we found out that there was a mail server also living in their DMZ that had been infected before that first machine was cleaned. So patient 0 was gone, right? They had no way to tell this mail server at the operating system level was beaconing and trying to contact a malware server out in the internet. So we just told Watson take a look at the offenses that have already been processed and see if those problems are happening anywhere else in the environment. Okay, so it's a particularly cool tool for saying, hey, we've discovered a pattern of a problem. Is that happening elsewhere? Just let Watson check for you. Up to the second intel. Guys, we all try and stay current. I know I do. You read things in your weekends and you talk to your boys and all of that. But up to a certain point, you are always going to be behind. The world is moving too fast. Watson is up to the second. At the very worst, your data is 6 minutes old. So if you're looking at a threat that's materialized in your environment, and you have Watson do this first level of analysis for you, it's going to say, hey, 40 minutes ago in England, we started seeing this threat appearing, and here's the attack chain on how to break it. It didn't exist yesterday, but here's your intel on it. That's a particularly cool thing. And this last one, we used to talk about first. But I need to talk about the kind of man and machine thing here. Is Watson is 60 times faster than having a person do the research. Now, we're not in any way saying my cognitive tool is better than your security analyst. It's not. Nobody's cognitive tool is better than a good security analyst. Good security analysts, however, are very hard to find and very expensive. If I can go through, I can prioritize for them, I can update their information, I can point out where they can do the work, and I can cross-reference to see if this is happening anywhere else, and oh, by the way, it's fast, suddenly the value that you're getting out of that security analyst, the number of things he can do in a day, is a heck of a lot higher. And this is something my CEO said, Ginny Rometty, that I think is so right, is man plus machine is always going to be better than man or machine, right? So the idea of, oh my God, it's Skynet and they're going to take over our machines, or oh, they're going to fire all the security analysts. There's no truth to any of that. There's no truth at all. But our guys trying to get so much done so fast, and good security analysts are worth their weight in gold. If I can say, here's all the best processes, here's all of the best machine logic to get your guy ready, to get your guy in place so he can make the best decisions quickest, this should be the best answer for all of us, right? Take your really smart analyst or team of analysts and say, how many tools can I put in place so that you can do your job the best? Okay, Watson is built and ready. There's a very limited AI training. Something I've talked about in a bunch of these videos, and it's so completely true. There are no data scientists that run QRadar. I have a wonderful team of data scientists that work up in Fredericton, Canada, that build QRadar, right? But we don't ever ask you to put a data scientist on running QRadar. This is not what you do. An analyst shouldn't need to get their hands this dirty in things. So there is a certain amount of AI training, the same way there's a certain amount of rules training to say, I've got a cranky old server and every once in a while does a port scan and maybe I'll get to fixing that one day, right? But you have to say to the AI, yeah, that's normal, it does that. Or I have certain users that do that. So it's not a zero AI training, but I will say it is much lower than what you see in some of these other areas where they're saying hire data scientists. I'm like, oh my God. So the real value here is the security, is cognitive security. It's fed from an expert system. I have big server farms, right, that live a couple places here in the US, a few overseas, that give you a feed, right? So you are fed from the expert system. Your analyst comes in, he's like, what is the crazy crap I've got going on right now? Oh, Watson saw this thing last week. Oh, my machine logic rules go through and they say that Pete Shelley is a little out of his norm and we should look into that, so that he has all the best possible tools. Okay, so coming back around to the to where we started, right? I want to talk about understanding the functions, right? All these terms, now we've kind of established what they mean. There's a place at the table for everything, right? Static rules are good stuff. They are the best use of machine time. They are the quickest use of machine time. You can leave them running and they execute so super fast on modest hardware needs. Machine learning allows everything that you see going into your QRadar or one of these other systems to inform other rules to make it smarter, right? And you have these cascading point systems to say, well, Pete Shelley started acting out of form today. Let's add him to a list of people that get a higher level of virus scanning, or people who are on a watch list. Create a reference set to say, I want to watch what's going on based on this. And we can create these machine learning rules, right, with this kind of point system so that the system gets smarter and smarter. You don't need to build these as a QRadar user because we've built them for you. But if you want to build more, you can. There is cognitive security in our friend Watson, right? And that's what I was talking about just a minute ago, is your security analyst is the gold of your organization, right? And that we need to be able to empower him as best as we can. And I originally thought when I was putting this together, I'm like, am I going to stop on AI? And I'm like, no. AI is just a movie term at this point. And I know that the real big brain scientist types still think AI is a legitimate technical meaning. And I guess in some fields it does. But as far as data security, right? I have my static rules, my machine learning, my cognitive assistant. These are just tools to give that human analyst so that their time to value is the quickest possible. And especially when we start talking about big industrial systems, the impact of a flaw, of a vulnerability, of an intrusion is going to be a lot lower because they will be able to catch it before it does big damage. Guys, I am Mike Winkler, and this has been a breakdown on the meanings of our terms.